Welcome everybody to our wisdom talk. And Gita, thank you so much for taking the time this evening to be with us today. I think before I go further, I think I just want to introduce our really special guest. It's not just any guest. He's a never-ending fountain of knowledge, and honestly, one of the most charismatic and captivating people I've ever met. He somehow makes leadership feel like a spiritual practice and coaching feel like a TED talk meets therapy meets ancient philosophy. He's got 20 years of global leadership and training experience. He's a LSE brain and a heart full of loving service. But what I love most about him is he walks the talk. And how I know this is because this amazing personality just happens to be my colleague, my mentor, and my very, very dear friend. And after this evening, he's also going to be your special guest at the magical Inner Revolution retreat. Everybody get ready to be captivated by the one and only Anobah. Please share some love and share some emojis and um, share your wonderful energy with Ed to welcome him to our wisdom talk.
Thank you for the very kind introduction, Mehul. I'm very blessed to know Mehul and to interact with him on a regular basis. So I'm really glad to be here and to connect with all of you, this wonderful Think Gita community. And yeah, looking forward to our time together on this call.
I'm I was genuinely so excited to speak to you today, and it feels like we're just expanding on our monthly catch-ups, and now we just get to share this knowledge and wisdom and love with everybody. So for everybody, this is our special guest. Ed is going to be the special guest at the Inner Revolution retreat, which is going to be from the 20th to 22nd of June at the Vedanta in Lincolnshire. And today we all get a sneak peek into, I guess, learning more about Ed, but also why it's so important to um, take a break, to retreat, and find out what this inner revolution is all about. So maybe I can kick off with the first personal question. And again, for everybody, please feel free to drop in questions in the chat, and we'll go through that as we go along. But maybe a first personal question: What, especially considering our topic of transcending or transcendence of the ordinary and transcending the ordinary, um, what made you feel like life was ordinary and normal, or that you didn't want to be ordinary and you didn't want to be normal, and then you needed to transcend it?
Very good question. So my journey was a very interesting one. I was when I first started meditating when I was 13 years old. And it wasn't necessarily for a spiritual reason. I was aware, very aware, because I always love to read and understand things. So I was very aware that the average person uses a very small amount of their mental faculties. I'm reading books about psychology and the mind, and a very interesting analogy that I used to share with people is that for the majority of us, we're like an individual living in a mansion, but we've restricted ourselves to one cabinet in one room in the mansion, and how much there is a huge, vast area of potential that is available to be explored if we are to transcend the ordinary. Because if everyone's living in the cabinet, that's the ordinary. And the real exploration, and my experience is that the real life begins when we realize that there's more available to us. To use another interesting analogy, there was a study done with fleas, and what they would do is they would first look at how the dimension of the body of a flea means that the flea, if you look at it in relation to its body mass, it can jump the equivalent of the Empire State Building, which is one of the tallest buildings in America. And what they did in this experiment is they put the flea in a container and they put the lid in. So the flea would jump and it would hit the top of that particular container. And this happened for some time. So what they did after that is they removed the lid. So the flea, you would think that the flea would then jump its normal height again, which was beyond the level of the container and the lid. But because it had become so conditioned by the circumstances, by the ordinary, that sense of restriction has become internalized. So even though the flea was now in a different situation and could jump to its full potential, the prison, the lid, had actually become internalized, and therefore the flea was no longer able to realize its full potential. And I really think this topic of transcending the ordinary, it speaks to the human condition at this time. That through so many situations and circumstances, we may be conditioned to the sense that life is just about the 9 to 5. Life is just about, going along the treadmill. Life is just about doing everything that everyone else is doing. And then we get to a certain age and then we pass away from this world. And I think that the Bhagavad-gita itself, for me, when I came across these literatures, it was like a pattern interrupt. And I was thinking about that, how wisdom can be a pattern interrupt. Wisdom literally opens the door to possibilities and potentials that we would otherwise not not detect. So just like the flea who's become conditioned by that particular barrier and doesn't realize that actually, no, you can go much higher than this. In a similar way, this retreat that we're doing, the inner revolutionary, and this topic of transcending the ordinary, for me, it speaks to that. It speaks to the exploration of human potential and the understanding that that human potential is most fully supported and realized when we tap into transcendental wisdom, the wisdom of Think Gita, not just transcendental wisdom, but transcendental association as well. So I'm very excited about that journey.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your journey in the beginning and then explaining how this is so empowering for the rest of us, or for at least for me, where knowing that there is just such a vast life of opportunity out there that we've just been restricted by, and I guess by social norms or whatever it is, and it just needs to be tapped in through wisdom. Maybe link to that. Could you share in your life how did you find that how did you realize that you needed to take a pause from the busyness of life? How did you know that you needed to stop being in this 9 to 5 and step back, reflect, to understand that you needed to not be ordinary?
It's a great question. And I think there were many circumstances. And this also speaks to how, different literature can also make a difference. I read an amazing book many years ago, and it was a story. It was a story about a young man who meets a guru at a petrol station. And it was interesting. The book was interesting because in the introduction to the book, it spoke about how the story was based upon a true life experience. And there were so many very powerful episodes in the story. There's one episode where the main character, this student, and I was a student at the time that I was reading this book, I was at university. There's one part of the story where this student has a dream. So he goes to sleep, and in the dream, he sees his life pattern play out. So basically, every one of us, based upon what we're doing, our life has a trajectory. So this student in the dream, he keeps going forward. So in the dream, he graduates, he gets married, has relationships, has children, and then he goes older and older. And this is all happening in his dream. And at the point that he's about to pass away, he feels a deep regret. And his deep regret was that at some point in his life, he was given an opportunity to take a different way forward. And in this dream, he realized that he didn't take that opportunity that he was given. And so he's just about to pass away, and he feels like a horror that, oh my God, I did not do what I was meant to be doing. I did not take that opportunity I was meant to be taking, and now it's too late. And then he wakes up from the dream in the story. And for me, that was a very powerful pattern interrupt as well, because I could relate to this student. I could really relate to this student. He's doing well. He's at university. You know, he's got friends. He's got a social circle. His studies are going well, and yet at the same time, when he meets the guru, one of the things that the guru points out to him is that behind everything that you're doing, the guru tells him behind everything that you're doing, there's a deep underlying, almost like question mark, fear or concern that you're actually masking by everything that you do. And it really got me thinking about the modern world. So for example, if we were tomorrow to find that the internet was not working, you couldn't go on, and there was no television, radio, internet, all of these things. Could you imagine how much it would affect people, how much it would affect their mental health? Because actually, for the vast majority of society, we use these situations as an opportunity to be distracted from certain deep underlying questions about life. And what I found in my journey is that actually the great power of transcendental knowledge and the kind of association that Think Gita can give is it can give the strength, the support, and the insight rather than running away from these deep questions, to look into these deep questions, to resolve these deep questions, to find answers for these deep questions. And I think that for me was my opening to transcend. I saw through the literature and also through other experiences, I saw the path most traveled, right? The normal path. And I got a sneak preview into perhaps how many of us who travel along the normal path but don't integrate a deeper understanding. It was like a fast forward. I got a sense this is the trajectory that you're on. This is what happens if you just go along with what everyone else is going along with. This is what happens when you fail to honor the deeper calling within the heart. And again, like I said, for me, that was it was a very deep pattern interrupt. And I'd already been involved in meditation before, so I was already experiencing that this wasn't theoretical, that practices such as meditation and different, kinds of, let's say, conscious raising activities, they weren't theoretical. They could really take us to another level and open up new doors of perception, deeper understanding about ourselves, deeper understanding about others. And I had in my heart a desire to experience that journey, because that same character in the book, the storybook, he goes on this amazing transformative journey. And considering how in the book it has said this is based upon a true story, I remember distinctly thinking to myself, if people can go on this kind of journey, I want to go on it. If people can have these amazing conscious raising experiences, I want to have these experiences. And that was a real catalyst for me on my journey of let's say inner development, in internal revolution. And Mehul, you are muted. So that's another revolution.
No. Can you hear me now? Sorry, I was saying that's so inspiring to hear um, how your journey progressed and where this transcendence or how you wanted to transcend the ordinary. Um, through your journey, I just feel like I've heard a lot of presence, and you've just been so present and conscious through the journey to be able to know that there's something deeper and there's something more meaningful to explore, which I feel, at least me personally, I struggle to do, because we just get, as you said, get so caught up in the busyness of life, which is an escape or is in a way for us not to deal with the deeper questions in life. And maybe a link to that, if we sometimes it feels like meditating or escaping, no, meditating or retreating is like stepping back and wasting time and not going on like the journey. would you be able to share how retreating and taking a step back is actually so important in moving forward and living a more deeper and purposeful life?
That's a great question. When you asked that question, what immediately came to my mind was the mobile phone. So we live in this technological age, people have smartphones. We have so many different things which we use our phone for. I remember when I was at university, the phones when the first mobile phones came out, they were not smart at all, right? They're pretty pretty basic phones, but how things have changed over time. But we experience, and this is a good analogy, we experience every day the understanding that for the phone to provide the functionality it can provide, we have to stop using it and charge it. Right? It's a beautiful. I think about this a lot now. I find that there's all kinds of hidden meanings in these beautiful Vedic literatures, such as the Bhagavad-gita. In various verses, Krishna and Arjuna are speaking. And Krishna will talk to Arjuna about what this idea of being equipoised. He says, one who's dear to me is equipoised in fame and infamy, in happiness and distress, right? It's again this beautiful series of insights about the dualities of the world, but those dualities they also have an integration. So again, going back to the mobile phone, how am I able to use my mobile phone in the day? How am I able to get the functionality of my mobile phone? It is distinctly because at a certain point in the day, I recharge it. At a certain point in the day, rather than just constantly using it without charge, at a certain point in the day, I say, no, I'm not going to use it. I'm going to put it on charge. I'm going to allow it to recuperate, to regenerate, to recharge, to get that energy back. And it is exactly the act of recharging which makes it useful. Right? It is exactly the act of receiving the energy which puts it in a position to utilize and give that energy to to perform certain functions. And I think we've often missed this trick in modern society increasingly. I think we often do not understand or do not fully appreciate the integration of opposites. So when I think about retreat, I don't think about retreat as running away from the world. I think about retreat as actually the most fundamental giving to ourselves so that we can operate most effectively in the world. In other words, the integration is such that they're two sides of the same coin. In order for me to be functional and healthy and optimal and have higher consciousness in the world, it is actually dependent on my recharging, my retreating, my regular rejuvenation. And we see this again. When I looked at this pattern through the Bhagavad Gita, it was so amazing to me because I started to see these rhythmic patterns, not just in terms of the example of the mobile phone, not just in terms of the example of people going on retreats, but we see this every day in our lives. What do we do? At the end of the day, what do we do? Every single one of us, we retreat into sleep. And in that sleep period, what do? We rejuvenate ourselves physically. We rejuvenate ourselves mentally. We rejuvenate ourselves emotionally so that we can then arise the next day with energy. And if we were speaking to a loved one and they said, I'm not going to sleep anymore because I don't want to run away from life, you'd think they're crazy. You think, what are you talking about? Of course, it is actually your ability to take rest, which allows you to function properly in the world. So I think this for me is one of those hidden, beautiful um, patterns of nature, patterns of reality, patterns of healthy living that we can grasp from this Bhagavad Gita. That there are two sides of the same coin, and when they're integrated, one supports the other. So my retreat actually supports my ability to be in the world and to give in my own life and in my own relationships and in my own inner development. It is actually the retreat that supports and empowers that movement forward.
That's so powerful to hear. Do you think would you be able to share how, because I understand it from a physical bodily perspective, how retreating and recharging is so important to be able to do what you need to do, and without it, you pretty much just burnt out or you just can't function. And from a spiritual perspective, how does the spiritual charging work?
Absolutely. So when we take time away from what we call the BAU, business as usual, life as usual, when we take a time to step back, it is, in my experience, talking from my own experience, it's been incredibly magical. And I'll share with you just a few impacts that this kind of these retreats have had on me. And I'm going to be very honest with you also. I've seen also in many people that I have been around that sometimes also the retreat is actually a safety valve. Because if the day-to-day life is very, very intense, very stressful, you've got work on one side, maybe elderly relatives that you're looking after on another side, then you've got the children on another side, so many different concerns. The retreats actually are allowing them to live their day-to-day life by giving them that time away. That's the first point. But more so, what I've also found is that when 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 we come back from a retreat, if we've gone deep in that retreat experience, we come back a different person. And when we come back a different person, we then are making different choices. And why are we making different choices? It's just like this. You know, we all have experience like this. You have something on your mind, some issue, some problem, something that you can't figure out the answer to, and therefore you decide, you know what, I'm going to sleep on it. And actually, what you're doing is you're not thinking about it. And because you're not thinking about it, you get the answer. They found studies on how great artists, inventors, intellectuals, sometimes they had their greatest insight when they just went away from the issue, when they just switched off from the issue. What I found is that with retreats, when we step away from what's happening in our day-to-day lives, we're able to see the world of our lives more clearly. Not just the world of our lives, we're able to see ourselves more clearly, free of all the noise, all the different expectations, all the rushing around. And because I've stepped back, I'm able to see everything more clearly. And therefore, when I step back into the world of my day-to-day patterns, I'm actually able to make better decisions as well. I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine, and he, again, being very honest, there was one teacher, one guru, and years ago, this guru was in charge of one particular area of the world, and there was a crisis, and the members of that community, they were all speaking to the guru. What should we do? There's a crisis. How should we deal with it? And the guru told them, he said, I'm going to go away for a while. And they were shocked. There's a crisis. We have to solve this emergency. And you're our guru, and you're telling us that you're going to go away for a while. People were not impressed. But you know what he said? The guru is very wise. He said to them, he said, if I'm not clear myself, how will I be able to have the clarity to solve the issue? He said, I'm going to go away. And he did go away for a short while. He stepped back from the situation. And by stepping away from the situation, he was able to gain great clarity. And then when he stepped back into that community, he was able to resolve the issue very quickly. And I often think about this when we go on retreats, it is exactly that zooming out, which allows us to then operate within the world of our lives much, much more effectively. So I find in my own life, and it comes to me more and more in my life, this message about that time out. And not time out as a kind of chaotic thing, but regular periods of time out. My own spiritual teacher, who I'm always getting so much wonderful inspiration from, he wrote a book called Spiritual Warrior 2. And that book, it's an interesting book because it's all about relationships, transforming lust into love. And when I first read that book, being transparent, the first thing that shocked me is because I'm thinking, right, it's about relationships, transforming lust into love. We're going to get into it. And the first chapter talks about leadership. And I'm thinking, oh, leadership? What's leadership got to do with relationships? But in the first chapter of that book, he makes a profound point, which I'm experiencing more and more in my own life. And that first chapter is actually about sex and the leadership crisis. And he talks about how sometimes leaders, because they're not looking after themselves properly, they misuse their power or position. And then he goes on to make a particularly impactful point, which in some ways I was completely unaware of. And he said that no one can be a leader with all of the intensity that's involved. And before I complete what he said, think about this. We're leaders in our own lives. We may be community leaders. We may be leaders in the workplace. We may be leaders amongst our social peers. We may be leaders in our family. We may be leaders of our children. So we have this leadership dimension going on to whatever extent, each and every one of us. He says no one can be a leader with all the intensity that's involved without regular periods of rest and renewal. Right? And I was reading something just the other day, and it's a very interesting term. The term it talked about what's called psychic debris. Right? So what that means is not I'm not talking about anything mystical here. When I say psychic debris, it means that you're around people and they're going through a divorce, for example, and they've got very strong emotions. They're feeling down, or you're around people and they're a bit stressed out about something going on in their own lives. And we don't necessarily appreciate, especially if we're a bit more sensitive, we don't necessarily fully appreciate how much their own mood, stresses, worries, fears, concerns become part of us. We may not be aware how much we may carry subconsciously some of the issues and concerns that the people around us are going through. And when we go on retreat, not only do we get to zoom out, which leads to better decision making, not only do we get to recharge, which means that we can come back into our life stream with more energy, mental, physical, emotional, and hopefully spiritual energy. Not only that, but when we go away, we're able to take almost like a subtle bath. When we spend time in nature, when we spend time with some spiritual focus, we're able to literally shed so much of that energy, so much of the day-to-day concerns and considerations, which if we don't shed, can become more and more another burden upon us, more and more something else that's covering us in a very subtle way, and that subtle thing can then become gross eventually. So I feel that retreats are part of our spiritual survival kit for the 21st century.
Yeah, I feel like throughout hearing you respond to that question, I could just see how retreating, just that taking the time to step back, is pretty much like a what do you call it, like a bow and arrow, where you have to pull the arrow back, um, to then allow it to go forward. And the further you pull back, the further forward the arrow will go. And
Absolutely, absolutely. It really, for me, it is a fundamental requirement to function well that one has regular periods of rest, retreat, recharge, renewal. And without that, there's absolutely, I'm very clear, without that, there's absolutely no way that anyone will be functioning optimally. No way. It's not possible because even if we're not aware of it, the day-to-day lives will entrain us. Even some of the ways that we live in the world now, if we had taken steps back regularly just to reflect, to step back and just think, how's my life going? What's going well? What's not going well? That if we as a human global society were to do that regularly, it would optimize our lives in ways that we could not even possibly imagine. I think about this in terms of Ayurveda, which is a very powerful ancient system of healthcare. What does Ayurveda do? When you go to an Ayurvedic doctor, they're able to pick up illnesses or diseases at the very, very earliest stages. So it's not even become gross yet. It's not become something that's so on the surface that it's an emergency. They pick it up when it's subtle. And because they pick it up when it's subtle, they can address it when it's subtle. And because it's subtle, they can do just a few small things which are not major life changes, major emergency changes, small things to redirect the health in a positive direction. And I feel that retreats are similar. A retreat is an opportunity to step back from the BAU and just to pull like a reflective, compassionate lens on our own lives. What's going well, right? I step out of the train track. I step out of my life journey to just step back and observe, witness consciousness. What am I doing well? And it's one of the things that we'll do at the retreat. We'll do various exercises which allow us to reflect and to make those subtle shifts that make huge differences over the long term, right? By stepping back from that BAU, rejuvenating ourselves, building the clarity of consciousness. There's a very wonderful Sanskrit term, Cheto Darpana Marjanam, cleansing the mirror of the heart, cleansing the mirror of the mind. And it's so powerful because when we see our lives clearly, when we see ourselves clearly, when we see other people clearly, automatically every decision that we make has now become upgraded. And so for me, the excitement of the retreat, and we're inviting all of you, if you've not signed up already, 20th, 21st, 22nd of June, we'd love to see you. We'd love to serve you. We'd love to work on this transformative journey together as we explore how things are going and as we explore the ancient tools of the Bhagavad-gita and the spiritual journey of bhakti, how those powerful, potent tools can be practically applied in our lives, not just on the retreat, but to give us constant value, constant growth, constant spiritual elevation as well. So yeah, for me, this is why I feel that these retreats are so important. And aside from everything else, they were great fun, great food, great association, great joy, great singing. I love to dance, singing and dancing. I was at this kirtan event recently, and as I was at the kirtan event, it really became clear to me it is the nature of every one of us to sing and dance in joy. You know, that's the nature of every person. And this world that we live in, where it's not so much about singing and dancing, it's more about paying the bills and, you know, navigating, you know, politics in the office, all these things. That's not the nature of the soul. So when we come on retreats, we come back to the real self. It's a retreat back to ourselves. It's a reconnection. And that's why I think it's so powerful.
Yeah, I'm seeing even your response now was so perfectly aligned to um, the previous response on how retreating can empower you spiritually. Because when you come back into the world with spiritual vision, it changes the way you operate in the world and what you need to do and how you interact with the world because you've transcended the ordinary, at least consciously you've at least consciously you've transcended it, and that helps you interact with the world in a completely different way.
Yes, you bring the gifts. You bring the gifts that the diamonds, the jewels, and the gold that you've cultivated, that you've brought out from yourself, from deep within. You bring those gifts into the world, actually. My teacher wrote something for the Washington Post. He had an interview with the Washington Post many years ago, and it was around the time of Valentine's Day. And he was making the point that the greatest gift that we can give our give to our loved ones is our own upgraded consciousness and character. So when I go away on retreat, well, I bring the person who comes back from the retreat is, you know, Mehul Mark II, Mehul Mark III. And because that upgraded character enters into the retreats, enters from the retreat space into the relationships, it changes the quality of every single relationship. Because for me, it's very, very clear. What life really shows me is that the common factor in every one of our interactions and projects and and the things that we strive for in life, the common factor is our character. The common factor is our consciousness. So for me, I find it such an efficient, effective, inspiring, and potent truth that rather than trying to change everyone else, if I can do some serious work on myself, automatically I will be able to upgrade every single aspect of my life as a side effect. That's
Mhm.
why for me, spirituality is not just a nice thing to have. It is it is the single most potent and efficient way to improve the quality of every aspect of our lives by transforming ourselves to bring a better version of ourselves to every project, every challenge, every relationship, every disagreement. We bring a better consciousness to it, and therefore it has much more likelihood that it will be an elevating experience. And I think that these retreats that we're inviting all of you to is just such a potent way to do that. It's like the genie, you go away on retreat, you change yourself, you grow yourself, and now that magic that you've invoked within yourself, that magic spreads throughout every dimension of your life.
Um, I'm so intrigued by this, and as I said in the start, captivated by you sharing about the retreat, but also about retreats. And I can completely resonate when I've been on retreats. It's been some of the most life-changing or life-transforming experiences. Maybe to bring it back down to a more practical level, on a day-to-day level, I see Shivani Gopal's asked a question. It's quite a long question, so I'll just read it out. In the world that conditions us to compare, seek validation, and chase love through external approval, hitting certain goals, how can we, when walking a path that looks radically different, overcome the inner resistance born from that conditioning? How do we cultivate the confidence to go all in with being different without constantly doubting ourselves? Because in the wider world, being different or living a different life can be a lonely journey that most people around have resistance to when they see us on the journey.
It's a very great question, and it's something that I've also struggled with myself. I can definitely relate to that. And I have to say honestly, I think that there's higher arrangements going on here, because what you've asked about, Shivani, is something I've been thinking about, researching and discussing recently. And there's a lot to tell you. I was My wife and I, we were in Germany. We were in Berlin. I think it was about a month ago now. So there was a beautiful, it's called, many of you will be familiar with kirtan, a beautiful kirtan call and response sacred sound event. And we were staying with some friends. And so the wife, it was a husband and wife, it was one couple, we were staying at their apartment. And so the wife, she's a psychologist. She's in that particular field. And we were discussing, because she's also into kirtan, think Gita, etc. Bhagavad-gita. We were discussing, and she was saying something very profound. She said that the most powerful way that people let go of external validation and have very deep and very healthy self-regard and self-esteem, she said the most powerful way is when they are part of a community of individuals who actually care about them. She said that when you're part of a community and you have relationships where people genuinely care about you, she said that what happens is they will act towards you in a way that shows that they see your inherent value. And by them doing that and being consistent in doing that, it leaves such a deep impression on you over time. And this is really important. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not something that just suddenly switches. And this is why also the relationships and the communities that we associate with are so important, because healthy community literally empowers us. And healthy community, I'm sorry to say this, but healthy community is very rare, because it actually requires individuals who have either done the work on themselves or individuals who are sincere and serious about doing the work on themselves and showing up in a healthy way towards others and towards themselves. But I've seen in my own experience, being part of healthy relationships, it empowers you. So to your point, Shivani, the reason why I've studied this very, very deeply, and in the future, maybe we can share more on this in other formats. But the reason why people have this external validation tendency is because they did not, for whatever reason, receive sufficient interactions, especially with significant people in their lives, that help them to understand that you are valuable, full stop. You're not valuable if you do something. You're not valuable when you do something. But actually, you're valuable just as you are, which interestingly enough is a key message of all spiritual traditions and a key message of the Bhagavad-gita. So this is just very, very transformative. We were earlier this year, we were in a place called Govardhaniko village. And His Holiness Radhanath Swami, who's a very powerful spiritual teacher, spiritual leader, he was coming to give a class to a group. We have a group of like business people and so on that we take on retreat. And in the group, someone asked a question, and it related to your point, Shivani, about self-esteem and self-worth and validation. And he said something which was so amazing. I recorded the class. I have to find where I recorded, but I recorded the class. He said, we are all of infinite and wonderful value because we are all loved by the Supreme. Now that's an interesting thing to say, but just think how much potency is there if we really internalize that. So Shivani, I get where you're coming from. That sense of being free of external validation, it comes when we associate regularly, consistently, but also with an open heart in the proper association. It's not something that happens overnight. It's a journey, but that journey is so incredibly powerful. Right? And I'm going to ask everyone to think about this. Just think about what your life would be like if you really deeply, in the core of your heart, you really knew that I'm valuable in all times, places, and circumstances because I'm infinitely and wonderfully loved and accepted by the divine. Not just when I do something externally good, not just when I achieve something, but that is my own fundamental state of being. And just think about how much more loving we would be with people if we really accepted that. Just think about how much more happy we would be for other people's success. Think about how much more secure we would be because now I'm not trying to achieve something to prove to other people that I'm worthwhile, but rather it is because I'm worthwhile that I'm achieving things for the benefit of other people. And imagine how much more confident we would be because I know that if I try something and it doesn't work out, I'm still valuable. It's not that because I failed in something, I become a failure, but I'm always valuable. I'm always loved. I'm always accepted. So I really believe that one of the functions of really healthy spiritual community is to empower people by reawakening the deep, not just philosophical awareness, but the deep vigyan, which means realization of the inherent value of each and every living being as essentially a spiritual person having a material experience in this world. And I think that our retreats and the philosophy of Bhagavad-gita and Vedic knowledge, I think that this is one of the single most powerful, transformative, and fundamental gifts that spirituality has to give to humanity. Otherwise, what we live in a world where our validation is constantly being externalized, right? So it becomes about likes on social media. It becomes about how many people are following you, and no one talks about this. No one talks about the fact that what happens when people don't follow you. What happens when other people have more followers? What happens when you don't get attention? Do you just die? Do you just die because now no one's validating me? Or is there another way out of this form of psychological slavery? So I hope that.
Um, Thank, yeah, those are such powerful points. And I feel like on your first point of association and being in a community, a retreat is such a wonderful way to be with like-minded individuals, to find a space or space for yourself, a space that you belong in, a space of empowerment and strength.
Can I
And
just
then something I read recently.
one other thing before you can do? Because I'm just jumping in so I don't forget. My spiritual teacher said that the people who are closest to us, they're the people who can help us the most, and they are also the people who can hurt us the most. So what happens is the heart, when the heart's open, then whatever comes into the heart is most potent. So if what comes into the heart is healthy and nourishing, it is the most empowering. If what comes into the heart is degrading or destructive, it is the most, let's say, it brings people down in the most devastating way. So to your point, Mehul, community, but community with discrimination where we choose wisely those that we allow into our heart, and that guarantees elevation and empowerment and a deep sense of love, which will automatically radiate out into our dealings with other people. So I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to say that before I forget.
No, thank you so much for completing that thought. Another point I was just thinking about that I read from Keshav Swami recently was uh, we so focused on building a life that looks so good on the outside, and then we forget about building a life that feels good on the inside. And I think that's like the more and as you were sharing, the more we feel fulfilled, the more we feel joyful, the more we feel the bliss. You stop worrying about the external feel of it too much because internally you're so saturated and satisfied. Um, there's a few other questions, and I know we've got 10 minutes. We've got 4 questions and only 10 minutes, so we're going to have to do these as rapid fire. What do you suggest for parents who are unable to attend a retreat?
Attend a different retreat when you are able. Answer. But
Yeah,
there's loads of online content as well. I know that Think Geek have so many different events, but please, what you can, I will say this to that question. You know, sometimes it's also about prioritization. We prioritize so many different things. It's also sometimes understanding the emergency to the emergency to emerge, the emergency to emerge our own spiritual strength, our own to raise our level of consciousness, and that can help us to find the time to attend. If the more we know how important it is and how significant it is and how transformative it is, the more we will be able to make time, find time to achieve to attend.
yeah, thank you. Next question. How do we share spiritual knowledge or spiritual wisdom to those who are not experiencing a calling within their heart already, or not seeking the higher truth and purpose because they are satisfied with a normal or an ordinary life, as we were saying? How do you awaken this calling to guide them closer to a spiritual path or divinity or God?
So it's like this. Whatever a person seemingly is satisfied with is based upon exposure. You see, if you haven't been exposed to something, there's no question of evaluating whether it's something that you're interested in. So what we have to do, I was thinking about this yesterday. See, what happens on the spiritual path is that there are many people who can quote spiritual verses or recite certain kinds of spiritual knowledge. And that's good. There's a place for that. But my own teacher, he would emphasize something far higher. And it's not how many verses that you know by heart, right? You know, recording or reciting or memorizing Sanskrit verses. It's not how many verses we know by heart. It's how many verses are in the heart. That means we have to be living embodiments of these spiritual teachings. When we are a living embodiment, there's a verse about compassion, but this person, they're an embodiment of compassion. There's a verse about service, but this person has a service mentality. There's a verse about caring for others, but this person actively demonstrates it in their day-to-day relationships. That will stimulate the desire of those who may not be consciously on the spiritual path, because people are interested in the effect first and the cause later. So it's like, what is it about this person? Why is it this person has this kind of energy? Where's that energy coming from? What is it about this person? Why are they so encouraging and inspiring? Where's that coming from? What is it about this person? Why is it that I genuinely feel that they genuinely have my best interests at heart? Where is that coming from? So first people experience the effect, and then they trace it back to the cause. So if we can be embodiments of these teachings, if we can take the gyan and turn it into vigyan, the knowledge into realization, into embodied behavior, character, activity, that can be the single most powerful way to inspire people in their interest of the higher journey.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, Keshav Swami also recently shared that the most powerful way to share spiritual wisdom is being an embodiment of it. So living a life by example, and this is the way you can transform, and that's exactly what you shared. Another thing he shared that I found quite interesting was how oh well, first you have to meet people where they are. In order to take them where you want to be, you can't be where you are already and then not take them along the journey. So it's trying to really understand them, being there for them at that time. And it's also just, I guess, wise to understand that it's not everybody's time is not now, and it's better to just be a friend and be open to them, so that when their time comes, they will come to you and they feel comfortable to come to you, instead of, I guess, closing or ending that relationship and then not giving that opportunity when their time does come, where they do feel this need to see, because that time will definitely come. So it's just about
When we're caring for people and being kind to people, what we're actually doing, we're we're passing on, we're transporting God's gifts to them. We're literally becoming an instrument to pass on, because the Supreme Person cares about everyone intensely, intimately, in a very, very deep and very sweet and very beautiful, very tender way. So what we're meant to be doing is to try to be an instrument of his own love, his own compassion, his own desire, deep desire for the well-being of everyone. We're meant to carry that towards other people. And in carrying that and passing that message on, as Mehul said, by our character and our behavior, not forcing people, not you've got to do this or do that. No, no. We sometimes may offer the gift if we feel the people are ready, but we want to embody that and pass that gift on. What has touched us, we should yet then share with other people as well. And that can be the greatest catalyst for transformation. And it will, to your point, that seed will fructify in its own time. You don't force a seed to become a tree. You plant the seed and you give it what? You give it the nourishment. You nourish it. And so we're here to nourish each other with the seeds of divine mercy, the water of grace, and the radiant sunlight of care, concern, and compassion. And those ingredients in a fertile consciousness, in a receptive individual, will automatically grow into something very unique and at the same time very beautiful.
Thank you. We have 2 minutes and 3 questions. If I, for those who asked, and maybe you can let us know if you have a few minutes to go over. If not, no worries at all. We can always get back to them. What about when you deal with trauma and are an advocate, relied upon to support others in the day-to-day functioning? How do you find positive association within that when systems are failing and it's a constant battle?
Yeah. So you may not find that you'll get the energy in that association. This is, again, it goes back to the same thing we talked about retreat, but we have to find sources of support and sources of energy. You see, ironically, this is exactly why it's good to step back and it's good to recharge, because we don't know the different challenges that life will bring to us today or tomorrow. So someone says, "Oh, I'm satisfied today," going back to a previous point. But actually, are you going to be equally satisfied tomorrow? Something can come up that you're not expecting. We don't know what life will bring, but what we can do is regularly charge our batteries so that whatever life brings, we're able to handle it in the best possible way. So when we're dealing with people who are going through something, it's even more important that we're strong, because if we're strong, then we can actually help to elevate them rather than being brought down by them. So you go out and you see some people are drowning and you have a desire to help, but if you can't swim, it's not there's two people drowning. If I can't swim, then instead of two people drowning, the moment I jump in, now no one's been saved. All that's happened is now three people are drowning. Yep. So without sufficiently strengthening ourselves, rather than elevating people when people go through difficulties, we will actually come down. We will become another victim, another casualty. So finding association, regular association that uplifts and strengthens, and one special quality of the spiritual journey is that the books themselves and the mantra meditation itself is also a source of strength, along with the association of those on that journey. And don't underestimate the power and the strength and the deep resilience that can come by regular, consistent connection, honest connection, heartfelt, open-hearted connection with those sources, mantra, um, spiritual literature, spiritual association.
Yeah, and I think I've also heard this recently that when you reading books, you're not only just reading books, but you're also associating with the author. And that is in itself a form of association. So reading books help you associate with that person. And then mantra, it's said that mantra is the embodiment of spirit of divinity. And associating with the mantra is associating with divinity directly. Um, Two more questions. It's not related to retreating, but need to ask a question on her journey of studying the Gita. I started reading the Bhagavad-gita, which teaches that Krishna is the supreme being and should be worshipped. But now that I'm reading the Upanishads, some of them seem to focus on Shiva as the ultimate reality. I feel more confused than when I began. How do I make sense of this, and how can I find a teacher to guide me through it? So need to just the first one is I've shared the Think Gita circles, which is a study group for the Bhagavad Gita. And in those circles, there's small circles where it's just 10 to 12 people. And there you'll study the Gita in a systematic way, and then also ask all these questions from a teacher who would be able to help. But yeah, Ed, if you want to share.
So just on that particular point, first of all, what Mehul has actually said is very, very important, because these literatures are meant to be explained through teachers, right? Through teaching and inquiry. And then, so that's one point. The other point is in the Bhagavad Gita, which is, everyone knows in Indian culture, Bhagavad Gita is the most famous book of literature in that particular tradition. So in the Bhagavad Gita, is that there's a very powerful statement which talks about how, and that statement talks about all Vedic literature, and it talks about the conclusion of all Vedic literature. And so it says, Vedescha Save Aham Eva Vedyo, Vedanta Krit Vedavit Eva Chaham. Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita says, by all the Vedic literature, actually, I'm meant to be known, you know? So it is not, that does not mean that we do not respect great personalities like Shiva and others. But if we understand from learned teachers who studied the teachings very broadly and see how all the different literatures fit together, it becomes very, very clear what the goal of these literatures are. And there'll be many verses and quotes which will substantiate that particular conclusion. So to Mehul's point, I think obviously it's a very important um, discussion to be had. It's not something we can deal with in 1 or 2 minutes. But if I would really suggest for you these Think Gita circles as a way of coming there. And I just want to encourage you. First of all, it's a great question. And I want to encourage you to continue questioning. This is the beauty of when there's real understanding, when we have confidence in real spiritual truth, we're very excited and open to receive questions and to clarify. It's not just shutting people down or just do what I tell you. It's yeah, that's a great question. Here's what it says here. This is a verse. This is what it says. This is how it explains why the Upanishads say what they say. This is how they fit together. And I think that will give you a very powerful and a very solid understanding of how all of these different literatures fit together and what the actual goal is as well.
Thank you for summarizing that so concisely in such a short time, because I know it's such a deep question to explore. But thank you everybody so much for being here this evening. A massive, massive, massive thank you to Ed for sharing light and sharing his wisdom with us. Thank you for making it so relevant, but so I wouldn't even say exciting. It's just for making it so essential for us to retreat, and explaining how important it is for us to take a step back to retreat, be on on a journey with like-minded individuals, to then come back, well, yeah, step back to then come back to the real world with a heightened sense of consciousness to be able to be the best versions of ourselves in our day to day. I've shared details of the retreat on the screen share. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So that's the QR code takes you to the link. If that doesn't work, I have shared the link in our chat. And yeah, once again, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you being here with us, sharing your wisdom, and making it so exciting to be at this event, at this Inner Revolution retreat. And we're looking forward to seeing and being with everybody there.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to spend time with you, and I look forward to seeing as many of you who can come at the Inner Revolution Retreat, 20th of June to the 22nd.
And for everybody who has many more questions to ask Ed, please be at the retreat and you can ask as many questions as you possibly like, because Ed will be there and is happy to answer it all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.